and welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. Donald Trump faces problems ahead as the Democrats win the House of Representatives in the U.S. midterm elections. Meanwhile, the Republicans extended their numbers in the Senate. The result opens up the White House administration to more scrutiny and could disrupt Trump's legislative ambitions on immigration, tax, and foreign policy until the next presidential elections in 2020. To talk more about the outcome of midterm elections, we welcome in our studio Mykola Beleskov. He's a deputy director at the Institute of World Policy. Hello, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, nice to be here.
So what will be your resolution on the results of 2018 U.S. midterm elections?
In some dimensions, they were already predetermined. I mean, actually, historically, if we look back into 150 years ago to the midterms election, usually the parties that represent the incumbent presidents, they lose either both chambers or at least one chamber. And somehow it was predetermined, and this election, they only continue the trend that exists in US politics. But on the other hand, yes, these midterms elections, they were prominent. They were prominent at least in three major dimensions. First of all, it's a record number of people that participated, more than 30 million more than 4 years ago, approximately 14 million people. The next important thing is its major participation of women, I mean as the candidates that were running for offices either in the House of Representatives or the Senate. And the next major important achievement, outstanding achievement of this election that differed from the previous ones, that this time Democrats managed to raise much more money than Republicans. Usually it's Republicans with the aid of big business who managed to draw much more amount of money, but this time it was Democrats, and in general for this election, $4.2 billion were spent compared with 2014, when only 3.8 billion was spent on the election. So in these dimensions, midterm election of 2018, they are prominent ones.
Taking into account what you just said and taking into account the results of the midterm elections in the U.S. in 2018, what kind of changes should we expect in the U.S. policy in future?
Well, on the one hand, of course, we should expect that Democratic Party will utilize to the greatest possible extent their majority, their slim majority in the House of Representatives. But it doesn't mean that U.S. foreign policy, for instance, may be changed greatly, or domestic politics.
What about Trump's administration policy?
Foreign or domestic one?
Let's talk foreign.
Let's talk foreign again. In Congress, we have both parties that share the foreign policy, so-called foreign policy consensus that exists since the end of 1940s. So they differ maybe in tactics somehow to this or that problem, how to solve it. But to great extent, they share the same ideas how, for instance, U.S. should approach Europe, Ukraine, Russia, Iran, China, etc. So I don't see that the control over the House of Representatives by Democratic Party, it will influence in very big different way Trump's foreign policy. So I don't think that we will see a major change. We will see, yes, we will see bigger control. It means more, for instance, hearings, more, for instance, different possibilities to investigate this or that things. But I don't think that we will see major changes.
Well, the experts have already called these midterm elections in the U.S. A so-called referendum. And the results of this referendum are supposed to be showing how strong are the forces of Democrats in the U.S. Could you comment?
I agree, but again, to some extent, because in House of Representatives, yes, we have a slim Democratic majority, but in the Senate, Republican Party managed not only to retain their position, but to increase its position. So we can say it was a referendum, and the U.S. population in its majority say no. And they demonstrate their opposition. But again, the major problems, the major explanation why we have such a big difference in the Senate, it's increase of Republican representation, in the House of Representatives, it's slim Democratic majority, because there is different voting patterns in the Senate and House of Representatives voting. In the Senate, usually the inhabitants of rural areas, they vote, and they predominantly are pro-Republican voters. But in the House of Representatives, usually vote people who live in towns and suburban areas. And yes, this time, majority of them, especially women, they decided to side with Democratic Party. But again, we can't definitely say that this was 100% no to everything that Donald Trump did since January 2017.
Speaking of women and the Democrats and the representatives in the House, and then the women Democrats in the House of Representatives, we have a speech, a clip of a speech by Nancy Pelosi, who's a minority leader in the U.S. House of Representatives. Let's listen.
Thanks to you, tomorrow will be a new day in America. Remember this feeling, know the power to win. And almost all congratulations to those dynamic, diverse, incredible candidates who have taken back the House for the American people. Let us salute all of our candidates. All of our candidates.
Could you comment?
Well, on the one hand, yes, it's right to share this kind of feeling, this delightment, happiness, but it would be a grave mistake for Democratic Party to fall in self-congratulation and to think that those who voted for them will vote for them, for instance, in 2020, I mean, for their candidate in presidential election. So in the end, for the Democratic Party in general, their majority in the House of Representatives, it's only a first step to recover from the loss in 2016, to prepare for the next presidential elections. As for the Nancy Pelosi herself, well, she will face a number of contenders to be elected as a Speaker of House of Representatives. So as for her, on the one hand, yes, it's a victory. Victory to be boast of somehow, but they will face a couple of challenges, strictly personally, I mean, for the Nancy Pelosi herself and for Democratic Party in general, I will say.
We've talked about possible changes in the U.S. policy within or out of the country. Now, let's talk about how the results of these midterm elections in the U.S. could bear any effect on the international arena, on the world policy.
Again, as I said, I don't anticipate the major changes because, again, the majority of Republicans in the Senate, it gives them opportunity to influence more to the bigger extent the foreign policy of the United States, because it's the Senate that oversees who is going to be this or that holder of the office, I mean, in government or as ambassadors. So they have more, in the end, the instruments to influence foreign policy decisions and to block negative developments for Donald Trump. Well, some people anticipate that with Democrats in the House of Representatives since January 2019, we will see major efforts, major strides to adopt new sanctions against Russia, for instance, but I don't anticipate it because we don't have the necessary prerequisites, because when Counter-American Adversary Sanctions Act was adopted in 2017, we have major prerequisite. We have massive Russian interference in U.S. elections, and we have very timid Donald Trump administration reaction, in the opinion of Congress, members of Congress. Now we have, yes, there were instances of attempts to influence these elections, but as we know from the special services of the United States, from intelligence communities, there was not such an attempt as it was in 2016. So there is nothing to respond, basically. And again, from the standpoint of the major their goal, and this goal is 2020 presidential election, for them it's more logically to concentrate not on foreign policy initiatives but on domestic initiatives.
Speaking of Russia's interference, there has been information popping up that there was limited misinformation targeting American voters on social media. Would you say that this is another attempt by the Kremlin to meddle in the U.S. elections, like a preparation stage for the major elections, the presidential elections in 2020?
What I can say definitely, yes, that we can't make a major conclusion that if we don't see these elections a major interference, we won't see it in 2020. And maybe Russians decided to take a pause somehow, because presidential elections are much more important. But in the end, the major consequence of what we saw in the last couple of months is that there was no interference of such a scale. So it doesn't create the basis to call for additional sanctions. So it's a major conclusion for today of major importance. But yes, we can say definitely 100% true that if there was no interference this time, there won't be interference in next 2 years election.
Thank you so much for coming and explaining the whole situation to us. That was Mykola Beleskov. He is the Deputy Director at the Institute of World Policy. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for the rest.